The story begins with a circus clown named Nello. His real name is Neil. He worked for Mr. Capello, who owned the biggest circus ride at that time. As a circus worker, Neil often gets an inappropriate salary. Until one day, in a show, Neil didn't follow Capello directions. Although managed to keep the audience entertained, but Mr. Capello did not seem to like Neil. In the morning, Neil was left alone with his caravan by the circus team. Later, he went to a priest's house and introduced himself as a good friend of several famous bishops. From the priest, Neil gets a free breakfast as well as a ride to Stoke-on-Trent. Even though the place was quite far away, the way Neil asked for help and also the limitations he had, made others unable to refuse. After reaching the last place, Neil can hitch a ride. Neil is picked up by a priest named Mark, who was sent by Neil's mother. Rev Mark immediately mounts Neil's caravan into his car, assisted by the previous priest who gave Neil a ride. They both had time to talk about Neil and also some famous bishops that Neil talked about. Pastor Mark explained, for Neil, church is the embodiment of Bible teachings. And if Neil says he knows someone, then it's true. Finished installing Neil's caravan, Rev Mark and Neil immediately continued their journey to Neil's parents' house. When he got home, Neil's mother gave him a warm hug. Neil and his mother often spent time sitting by the window watching the birds fly. Neil knows all the types and names of birds. Then, Neil's mother starts to wonder a bit about Neil's life at the circus. She is worried that Neil got bad treatment there. Neil says everyone there takes good care of him. Only one person doesn't like him. Neil says if he is nice to people, then they will be nice to him too. If they're still not nice, it means they just don't like him. In fact, Neil's mother began to worry about her son's future if one day she was gone. She wanted Neil to be able to take care of his own life and not burden others. For that, Neil's mother then said that Neil should be able to find a job. Then Neil replied that he already had a new job at Keele University. The job that Neil was referring to was not like the work others imagined. What Neil did was only welcome students who came to campus, and even then without any payment. Keele University's students were starting to notice Neil for always greeting them in a friendly manner. At that time, Neil was like the mascot of the campus. Neil also made a good friend, he was Malcolm. Both of them like Stoke City Football Club. So, they often eat lunch and watch football games together. In fact, Neil attended lectures on soccer club activities and parties organized by students. After a while, Neil's mother was curious about what Neil was actually doing at the university. Neil replies there are many things he does. After that, Neil's mother takes Neil to the job fair, to try to find a job for Neil. They finally arrived at the job fair. The officer said there was a vacancy for a ceramics maker at Susie Cooper. However, Neil refused it because it didn't match the job he was looking for. The officer asked what kind of job Neil wanted. Therefore, Neil said that he wants to be a manager for Stoke City Football Club or be a pastor. Then the officer asked about Neil's experiences. He replied that he had helped students at Keele University and was also a registered clown. At the time, there were only about 100 registered clowns in the UK. The officer at the job fair then tries to find out if there's a circus place that might accept Neil to be a clown. Neil informs that there are no job openings at the circus, so he wants to be a football club manager or a priest. After that, the officer told Neil's mother that there were many ways to find a job, if only Neil had no limitations. After attending the job fair, Neil and his mother go to the supermarket to shop for their daily needs. Neil's mother tries to teach him which food is healthy and which is unhealthy. But Neil kept answering his mother's every word, until Neil's mother accidentally raised her voice. Neil's mother was old and suffering from a disease that made her body weaker and weaker. She was worried that she would not be able to make Neil able to live independently before she was gone. After much thought, Neil's mother decided to buy a house so Neil could learn to live independently. Later, Neil goes to Rev Mark to inquire about his mother's decision. Is it God's wish or just her mother's wish? Rev Mark then explained briefly that sometimes, mother's desires and God's desires are one and the same. After receiving this explanation, Neil finally agreed to live alone. Assisted by Malcolm, Neil moves things to his new house, which turns out to be only one house away from his mother's. After moving things, Neil tells Malcolm about his intention to create a football club called the Neil Baldwin Football Club, where he will choose the players, be the manager, and also the captain of the team. Then, on a radio broadcast, it was reported that the manager of the Stoke City Football Club had been dismissed. Even though he lives alone, Neil's mother still often comes to see how Neil is doing. One day, Neil's mother finds a letter on the electricity bill addressed to Neil. Unbeknownst to her son, she took the letter home and she called Rev Mark to help her deliver the letter. Neil's mother was very surprised when she found out that Neil's electric bill amounted to £800. Though he had been living alone for a month. Neil's mother blames herself for making Neil live alone. Rev Mark tried to calm her down and said that he would talk to Neil. But apparently, that day, Neil was not home. He went to London to meet Parliament. Wherever Neil was going, he could only rely on rides from people. Similarly, when he went to the Parliament building, As soon as he reached the Parliament building, Neil gave a letter to the guard. After receiving a letter from Neil, the guard went straight into the building. Thanks to that, Neil finally managed to meet with Tony Band. After returning from the Houses of Parliament, Neil opened the electricity bill that his mother had previously opened. A little surprised and feeling that the bill was wrong, Neil's mother asked how Neil could use that much electricity. It was discovered that Neil had turned on the heating throughout the day to keep his pet birds warm. Neil tells his mother not to worry. He would pay for it once he got a job at Stoke City Football Club. Neil's mother later said there were no job openings in Stoke City. Lou Macari has been appointed as the new manager. Casually, Neil said that he would see Lou Macari tomorrow. The next day, Neil along with other Stoke City supporters, welcomed the arrival of Lou Macari as the new manager of their favorite team. Neil wasn't there just to support Lou Macari. But there was something else Neil wanted to ask Lou Macari, so that no matter what happened, Neil continued to wait in front of the building. Neil waited for Lou Macari to come out late into the night. Finally, the person he was waiting for came out. Without further ado, Neil immediately asked Lou Macari, is there any job for him? At first, Lou Macari felt that there was no job for Neil. But then, he offers a job as a kit man. A kit man is the person who prepares to clean the jersey and shoes of the players. And usually, a kit man always follows wherever the team is playing and practicing. When Neil's mother heard the news that her son was going to work in Stoke City, she had doubts. Was it true that Lou Macari offered a job to Neil Baldwin? Confidently, Neil said that it was all true. Neil's mother then asks what work Neil will do. Later, Neil explained that he just needed to prepare clean clothes, then collect the dirty clothes, and also take them to the laundry. Neil's mother doubted that her son could do the job, because in all his life, Neil had never even taken care of his own dirty socks. Not only did Neil's mother doubt his job, even the Stoke City office keeper doubted it. When Neil comes to work on his first day, he has to put on a chicken costume and prepare all the players needed for a match. When the players were briefing with Lou Macari, Neil in his chicken costume suddenly came. Neil made the serious situation into a cheerful and full of laughter. The first days of working as a kit man were quite tough for Neil, because not once or twice did he have to hear the ridicule from the players. But even though it was a little painful for Neil, he still did a good job. Not only providing for the needs of the players, Neil also became a friend to Lou Macari. Neil always comforted Lou Macari whenever he was stressed about his team. Neil is able to make others laugh with the little things he does. While Neil is enjoying his job so much, his mother's condition is getting worse day by day. Neil's mother goes to Lou Macari to ask why he hired Neil. Then, Lou Macari explained that Neil was a funny person without trying to be funny. He is also an honest and straightforward person. Later, Neil's mother said that Neil was not an easy child to understand. Lou Macari explained again that talking about football is not as difficult as a challenge at university that demands to think. Neil's mother tries to understand, then starts talking that she won't live forever. She wanted to make sure Neil was fine. She had also entrusted Neil to the convent to watch over him in case she died. Hearing that, Lou Macari said that Neil was more suited to be in the dressing room than in the convent. According to him, Neil's role is very important for their team. Lou Macari felt Neil liked them and they liked Neil very much. Neil is able to provide motivation and bring cheer for the players. During the time Lou Macari and Neil were together, Stoke City continued to grow into a strong team and often won matches. Even Lou Macari made a special request that every week, Neil gave a greeting to the team. One day, when the Stoke City players were changing clothes before training, Neil was teased for still being given his underwear by his mother. To them, it's just a joke. But for Neil, it's a little painful to hear. During practice, Neil secretly wears all of the players' underwear. No one was aware of it, even Lou Macari just thought Neil was gaining weight. Until practice was over, one by one, the players began to realize that they had lost their underwear. The players were suspicious of their juniors. But then, Neil took off his outer pants and revealed the layers of underwear he was wearing. Instead of being angry, they all laughed at Neil's unexpected behavior. When Neil comes home after a long day at work, Neil finds his mother lying on the floor of his room. He immediately took his mother to the hospital for examination. And according to the doctor, Neil's mother's condition was not very good, so she couldn't be taken home immediately. One of the doctors Neil knows, who is also in charge of Neil's mother, explains that his mother is having a heart attack. The doctor advised Neil to be strong, so that his mother could also be strong. The doctor explained that Neil's mother might not be able to go home, but the social service would find a place where she could be properly cared for. Knowing Neil's mother is sick, Lou Macari allows Neil to take as much time as possible to care for his mother. But Neil refuses to take days off from work. He was sure his mother would get better. Later, Lou Macari asked how Neil was always able to think positively. Neil replied that he always wanted to be happy. So, he decided to be happy. If something bad happens, just think about the good. Lou Macari then asked what kind of good thing Neil meant. Neil also replied, such a good thing like the best recruitment Lou Macari has ever made. No matter how busy Neil is, he never misses visiting his mother. He also began to learn to shop for daily needs by himself. Although often Neil doesn't go shopping according to the list his mother has made, his mother is patient and doesn't blame or scold Neil. After his mother got sick, Neil's appearance became careless. Many people around Neil are starting to worry whether Neil can really take care of his own life. When meeting Neil at church, Rev Mark told Neil to pay more attention to himself, considering his mother was still in care. Rev Mark can't always keep an eye on Neil, so he explains that it needs to be done by Neil to lessen his mother's worries. Hearing the words from Rev Mark, Neil then said that he has God, he has students, he has Stoke City, and also has his mother. According to him, there is nothing to worry about. One day, over the radio broadcast, Neil heard the news that Lou Macari was stepping down from the position of Stoke City manager and he was going to join Glasgow Celtic. While at work, Lou Macari meets Neil to talk about his decision to resign. Lou Macari said that whoever the manager is, that person would value Neil as much as he did. As a thank you to Neil, Lou Macari asks Neil as a player in the last few minutes of a testimonial match. It seems, this opportunity makes Neil more excited to live his days. He began to be able to shop according to the needs that had been written by his mother. He also tidied up his appearance by shaving his beard. Of course, Neil's change made his mother happy and proud. Neil tells his mother that tomorrow, he will come as Nello's clown, at the request of the owner of the social house where his mother is being cared for. His mother smiled and was sure her son would make everyone happy. Later, Neil also informed that night, he would be playing for Stoke City. Seeing her son becoming more reliable, Neil's mother cries happily and asks Neil not to rush to leave. When Neil held his mother's hand, Neil's mother said that she was very proud of him. Long story short, Neil has arrived on the field. A few minutes before the game, Lou Macari asked Neil to warm up before going down. Unlike usual, at that time, all the audience cheered for Neil. It turned out that everything had been arranged by Lou Macari. He wants this match, Neil can score 1 goal for his team. Lou Macari told Neil that he had to score a goal to dedicate to his mother. Everything went according to plan. Neil managed to score in the last minute of the game.
This really happened, by the way.
Really happened like that?
No.
But before going home, Neil met Lou Macari to apologize for feeling that he had made a lot of mistakes during the match. However, Lou Macari didn't mind it. Instead, he suddenly said that the best recruit he ever did was Neil. The next day, before going to visit his mother, Neil bought a newspaper with a story about him. Neil wants to show the news to his mother. But when he arrived, Neil was immediately directed to enter the office. They told him that his mother had passed away last night very peacefully, while sleeping. After that, Neil returned home with a feeling he had never felt before. But when he sits alone, he can't help but cry, feeling how painful it is to be left by the only person he's had since childhood. After the funeral was over, Rev Mark and Malcolm accompanied Neil to make sure he was okay. They both cheer Neil by saying that Neil has done everything well. A few days later, Neil came to the place where his mother was last taken care of, to pick up his mother's belongings that were still left behind. After his mother left, Neil's days were spent daydreaming. He looked like couldn't take good care of himself. Rev Mark, who often pays attention whenever Neil comes to church, begins to feel worried about Neil's condition. Likewise with Malcolm, he realized Neil was not seen watching at some of the football matches that Stoke City participated in. So, he went to Neil's house to see how he was doing. He also bought some groceries for Neil's daily needs. Whenever Neil asked about how he was, he always replied he was fine. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Then, Malcolm informed Neil that there would be a new student orientation soon. Neil had to come to open the stand and pick the best players for the football team he had planned before. At first, Neil wasn't sure he would attend, arguing that his back still hurt. But his mind changed when Malcolm said there would be a buy one get 2 hot dog promotion. Finally, Neil comes to open registration for his soccer team. But until the day ended, not a single student came to his stand. As the night wore on, Malcolm, who was just about to go home, accidentally saw Neil, who was still standing outside waiting for a call that seemed like it would never come. Malcolm gives him a ride and drives him home. On the way home, Malcolm asks if Neil will continue to wait if no one comes. Neil replies even though Malcolm didn't come, he was sure someone else would. On the second day of freshman orientation, Malcolm secretly contacts someone to bring some people to sign up for Neil's football club. After the recruitment process was completed, the training began, with Neil as manager, player, and team captain. Neil's days are getting more and more fun after his football club is active. Not to forget, Neil diligently comes to church to pray and listen to sermons led by Rev Mark. To this day, Nello the Clown is still a legend in the circus community. And Neil becomes the manager of Neil Baldwin Football Club. He has won Player of the Year for 42 seasons. Malcolm and Neil have been friends for over 50 years. while Lou Macari is still in the world of football as a commentator. Lou Macari called Neil a man without a corner and very rare. Neil also helped Keele University's students for 53 years. In June 2013, for his service, Neil was an honorary graduate of Keele University. Then, in 2015, Stoke City Football Club named him the Best Supporter of the Year.